It all started with a vest. Not a badge, not a cruiser, not even a flashing light, just a vest. It was a black tactical-style vest with white block letters stitched onto the front, HOA Enforcement. I remember seeing it for the first time on a Wednesday morning in early spring. The dogwood trees were just starting to bloom, and the sun had barely burned off the morning mist when I spotted the man walking down Juniper Lane like he was on patrol in downtown Philadelphia. He had mirrored sunglasses, military-style boots, and a clipboard tucked under his arm. I stood on my porch watching him pause in front of each driveway, scribbling notes and snapping photos of parked cars with a digital camera. My first instinct was confusion, then suspicion. You see, I moved into Evergreen Hills 3 years ago after retiring from a 25-year career in broadcast television. I was the guy behind the scenes, the technician who made the signal flow, who spliced wires, framed shots, adjusted mics, and ran backup generators when the studio lights blew out. I've seen a lot in my time, including some of the more absurd sides of politics and neighborhood power struggles. But nothing prepared me for this guy. I'd never seen him before, so I walked down to the edge of my lawn, pruning shears still in hand, and called out, "Hey, you with the HOA." He turned like a switch had flipped, stood tall, chin up. "HOA Enforcement," he said, tapping the vest like it was sacred. That vest, it wasn't standard issue from any official agency. I knew that instantly. It looked like something ordered from a surplus site, or maybe stitched up at one of those tactical gear hobby shops. And there was no nameplate, no ID, no official anything. Still, he marched like a man on duty. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. "Officer Dale," he replied. "Community safety, keeping the place in order." I didn't say anything, just nodded. That night, I checked the HOA website. No mention of Officer Dale. I emailed the board to ask who he was. No response. By the weekend, he was everywhere. He started walking a routine beat, morning and evening, sometimes on foot, sometimes on an electric bike, which he'd outfitted with what looked like red and blue reflectors taped to the handlebars. No sirens, of course. But the implication was loud enough. People started whispering about him. Some neighbors assumed he was hired by the board. Others thought he was just another power-hungry volunteer with a whistle. Either way, he was acting like he ran the place. And the thing is, most people let him. Maybe it was the vest, maybe it was the clipboard, maybe it was how he looked you in the eye and used words like code compliance and visual obstruction. Whatever it was, people didn't challenge him. They just nodded, moved their trash bins, and hoped he'd walk past without stopping. But I kept watching, quietly. He never wore a body cam, but I had cameras of my own. Just the regular stuff, a doorbell cam, a driveway sensor, and one older model still mounted under the eaves. I wasn't recording him intentionally, at least not yet, but every time he walked past, he looked into the lens like he was daring it to blink. Something about that rubbed me raw. Then came the flyers. They were printed on cheap neon cardstock and taped to the mailboxes overnight. Bright orange sheets that read, "Reminder, enforcement patrols active. Residents are expected to comply with all HOA standards. Non-compliance may result in citations." Below that was an email address I didn't recognize, daledirect@enforcementmail.com, and a P.O. box located in a nearby town. I scanned the letter. No official HOA letterhead. No signatures. But that didn't stop it from being taken seriously. The next day, I saw a family down the block repaint their shutters. Another neighbor removed a wind chime. One older couple even hired a landscaping crew to re-edge their lawn after Dale had paused in front of their property for too long. I tried again, emailed the HOA president, Martha Sanderson, directly. This time she responded, but only with a vague message. "Thank you for your concern. Mr. Vincent is working with us in a volunteer capacity to promote community standards." That was it. No explanation, no boundaries, no rules. So now he had a name, Dale Vincent. I did some digging. No public record of law enforcement certification, no security license. But I did find a trail of online comments on neighborhood watch forums in other counties. Different names, same tactics, vest, clipboard, empty threats. I printed everything, documented it all, and then I waited. Because in places like this, when someone like that shows up, things always get worse before they get better. And I had a feeling Dale Vincent was just getting started. At first, it was little things subtle enough that if you weren't paying attention, you'd shrug them off as typical HOA pickiness. A notice taped to your door about your garbage can being visible from the street. A friendly reminder to mow your lawn more frequently. Even a suggestion that your porch light might be too bright after 10 p.m. But once Dale Vincent got comfortable in his make-believe uniform, those notices started to look a lot less like guidelines and more like ultimatums. I knew it wasn't just me. Within 2 weeks of his sudden emergence, several neighbors began mentioning strange interactions, mostly during our evening dog walks or bump-ins at the mailboxes. Mrs. Evelyn Cowell, a widow in her 70s, who lived 3 doors down, told me he'd knocked on her door demanding she remove a small patriotic flag she had staked in her flower bed, said it violated aesthetic standards. She was so shaken, she pulled it out that same afternoon. Then there was the Jefferson family, a young couple with a toddler and a dog. Dale allegedly cornered them in their driveway, warning them about their unregistered vehicle. The car in question, a perfectly legal Subaru with valid tags. He insisted it had been parked too close to the sidewalk and cited a rule that didn't exist. One by one, people started folding under the pressure. You could feel the tension when you walked down the street. Garage doors stayed shut longer. Porch lights went off earlier. Even the neighborhood kids who used to skateboard near the cul-de-sac had disappeared entirely. Because Dale wasn't just pretending anymore, he believed it. And that belief was turning dangerous. I came home one afternoon to find a folded slip of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It read, "Notice of violation oil stain on driveway surface. Please resolve within 48 hours to avoid further action. HOA enforcement." He signed it with a flourish. I checked the spot, maybe a 5-inch patch from a dripping mower. Hardly hazardous. But the real issue wasn't the stain. It was the tone. Further action. From whom? I scanned the note, logged it, and added it to my growing file. But it escalated faster than I expected. The following week, Dale started using cones. He'd haul out 4 orange plastic cones, weathered and scuffed, probably bought secondhand, and place them around his parked bike near intersections like he was securing a perimeter. Sometimes he'd wave cars down, flagging them over with hand signals. Other times he'd stand still in the middle of the road, arms crossed, daring someone to challenge his authority. And people stopped, not because they believed he had power, but because they didn't want the confrontation. Evergreen Hills had never seen anything like this. We were a community built on quiet routines, weekend barbecues, sprinkler systems, the hum of riding mowers. We weren't ready for someone like him. I remember watching from my porch one evening as Dale stood in front of the Thompsons' driveway, berating John Thompson about the non-conforming color of his front door. He held up a swatch card and waved it like a citation pad. The door was navy blue. HOA guidelines mentioned earth tones, but nothing specific enough to justify what Dale was doing, threatening to issue a fine warning of report escalation. Thompson, a former Marine, clenched his fists but didn't argue. He just nodded and walked back inside. I walked over. Dale turned before I got close. "You have business here?" he asked sharply. "I live here," I replied, holding up my phone casually. "Just documenting for record keeping," he sneered. "You can't film enforcement." I smiled. "Sure I can. This is a public street." He turned his back, muttering into his plastic radio. That was the moment I knew this wouldn't resolve itself quietly. The HOA board wasn't stepping in, and Dale's actions were emboldening him by the day. He started issuing printed citations on letterhead that looked just real enough to confuse the average resident. The top read, Evergreen Hills Community Compliance Division, a department that didn't exist. He left envelopes taped to garage doors with payment due slips. Suggested checks be made out to Evergreen Safety Initiative, again a fiction. Some neighbors paid. I know this because Mr. Wei Chang, a soft-spoken retired teacher, told me he'd mailed in 2 separate fines, already terrified that he'd be sued. The fraud was now financial, but fear still ruled. Even the HOA board seemed hesitant. When I confronted Martha Sanderson again, she waved me off. "He's intense, I'll give you that. But we need more volunteers like him. He's proactive." Proactive, that word stuck with me. The next morning, I found a cone on my own lawn. Just one. Placed dead center on the patch of grass between my driveway and the street. Attached to it was a laminated sheet, warning property subject to compliance review. Do not tamper with marker. HOA enforcement active. I laughed out loud. Then I went inside and ordered 6 new security cameras. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about building a case, because Dale was no longer playing pretend, and if no one else was willing to stop him, I would. There's something about working behind a camera for 25 years that makes you attuned to patterns, movement, light behavior. I knew how to catch people at their most authentic without them ever realizing they were being recorded. That instinct didn't retire with me. So when Dale Vincent crossed the line from annoying to threatening, I didn't yell. I didn't confront. I documented. My house was already equipped with a modest security system, standard doorbell cam, a motion sensor in the backyard, and an old dome camera pointed at the front lawn. But after the cone incident and the fake citation under my windshield, I knew I needed more. Not for protection. Dale wasn't violent, but for evidence. For truth. I added 2 more cameras, one facing the sidewalk from the corner of my roof, the other attached to a tree facing the street. I installed them high, discreet, and angled with precision. No blind spots. I synced everything to a local server with motion-triggered recording and timestamps. I didn't know what I was building, not exactly, but I knew it would be needed. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the neighborhood archivist. Dale's patrols grew bolder. He expanded his route beyond the main loop into the side cul-de-sacs, taking mental inventory of lawn gnomes, seasonal wreaths, and garden lights. Every evening, like clockwork, he'd stop in front of a house and stare at it, as if trying to will something into violation. I had hours of footage Dale standing in front of the Carmichael family's rosebush, measuring it with a tape measurer. Dale knocking on the Alvarez family's door, warning them about a child's inflatable pool. Dale circling a teenager's car and photographing it from 4 angles. Then came the night of the curfew enforcement. It was around 9:45 p.m. The Nelson family were hosting a small graduation party for their daughter, half a dozen cars parked legally along the curb, string lights on the back patio, soft music playing. By all accounts, it was a peaceful, joyful evening. Until Dale arrived. He marched up the sidewalk like a man on a mission, wearing his black vest and shining a flashlight not into windows but onto license plates. I watched from my upstairs window as he began taping yellow notes onto each car windshield. I caught it all on camera. The next morning, several neighbors woke to find citations titled "Noise Violation, After Hours Disturbance" stuck to their doors. The citations demanded a $50 donation be made to HOA Enforcement Support Fund and warned that further violations may result in civil escalation. The language was terrifying, deliberately so, and deliberately vague. This time, I didn't just log the footage. I started organizing it. I created folders by date, timestamps, locations. Every clip was backed up, twice, one on a physical drive, the other in cloud storage under an anonymous login. Because it wasn't just about Dale anymore. It was about complicity. See, I found a paper trail. Tucked inside one of the HOA newsletters from February was a short blurb. We're proud to announce a new initiative led by Dale Vincent to help reinforce community standards. This program, while volunteer-based, reflects our commitment to excellence. Commitment to excellence. They were letting a man impersonate law enforcement. I printed it, added it to the folder. I also started getting messages, quiet ones, from neighbors who were afraid to speak up publicly. Mrs. Evelyn Cowell asked if I could install a camera on her porch. Mark and Lisa Jefferson emailed to ask if I had footage of Dale harassing their son. He'd followed the boy on foot for 3 blocks, radio pressed to his ear like he was calling backup. They were afraid. Not because Dale had real power, but because he acted like he did, and no one in charge was doing anything about it. The more I filmed, the more I noticed small tells in Dale's behavior. He didn't just like control, he needed an audience. He made sure people were watching before he delivered a warning. He paused in the middle of the street when a window opened. He postured. He monologued. And above all, he escalated. One night, I caught him walking up to a neighbor's home and photographing their child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk. He stood over it like it was graffiti, muttered something about vandalism, and left a note in the mailbox. The child was 6. That was the night I realized this had to stop. I reached out to an old colleague, Stan Miller, a retired field producer who'd once won an Emmy for his expose on municipal corruption. I sent him a teaser clip, Dale measuring a rosebush while muttering radio codes into a static radio. Stan called me within an hour. "Where is this?" he asked, half laughing, half horrified. "Evergreen Hills," I replied. "And it's just the beginning." We talked for an hour. He offered to connect me with a local investigative unit, but I told him I wasn't ready yet. I needed one more thing, a moment big enough to make everything undeniable. Something public. And then, as if fate had been eavesdropping, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line, Governor's Green Corridor, visit route details enclosed. There it was, in plain language. Governor Klein will be passing through Evergreen Hills on his way to the groundbreaking ceremony for the Clean Transit Hub. Expect temporary delays along Cedar View and Juniper Lane. That's right. The governor's convoy would pass directly through Dale Vincent's self-declared patrol zone, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. He wouldn't be able to resist. The man had built an entire identity around being HOA enforcement. And now, with real motorcades and real officials coming through, he'd finally have the audience he'd always craved. I started preparing. Every camera was cleaned, re-angled, and tested. I bought 2 new GoPros with live broadcast capability and positioned them across the block with neighbors' permission. I set up a private live stream and created burner social accounts to post links on the day of. Because Dale Vincent was about to play his biggest role yet, and this time the whole world would be watching. When the official email from the city planning department hit my inbox, I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Governor Robert Klein, our actual sitting governor, would be traveling through Evergreen Hills. Not as a guest, not for a campaign rally, but as part of a carefully orchestrated tour for the new Green Mobility Corridor initiative, designed to showcase environmentally conscious neighborhoods along suburban transit routes. It was real. It was scheduled. And it would pass straight through the exact block where Dale Vincent made his daily power walk in his fake vest, plastic badge, and clipboard full of nonsense. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee forgotten, heart ticking faster than it had in months. The route was set to begin at the Township Office Building, move west, on Cedarview Boulevard Loop, through Juniper Lane, our street, and continue out the opposite end toward the new electric bus facility. And the timeline, Thursday, 8:00 a.m. sharp. It was all happening in less than a week. At first, I didn't know what I felt. A weird conflicting mix of excitement, dread, and something like grim anticipation. Because while most people saw the governor's visit as an honor or an inconvenience depending on their schedule, I saw it as something else entirely. A trigger. If Dale had ever wanted to feel important, if he had ever believed the delusion he wrapped himself in every day, this was the moment that would pull it to the surface. And in front of the wrong people, with the wrong theatrics, it wouldn't just be HOA drama anymore. It would be a felony. So I did what I always do when I sense something big coming. I planned. I opened my evidence folder and began organizing everything chronologically, from the first fake citation he left on my windshield to the footage of him photographing sidewalk chalk. I rewired the 2 porch cams for direct-to-drive recording, eliminating any Wi-Fi disruptions. I set up auto backup to a secure cloud account, and then I reached out quietly, discreetly to 3 neighbors I trusted the most. I met them on a Sunday evening under the pretense of a backyard cookout. Hot dogs, paper plates, a 6-pack of IPA. I kept it casual, but my voice was steady when I laid it all out. Something's going to happen Thursday, I said. They listened. I showed them a few key clips, nothing too alarming, but enough to prove Dale had taken his fantasy far beyond neighborhood watch duties. Enough to show they weren't imagining the tension, the absurdity, the fear. We don't confront him, I said. We record. We stay calm. We document. But this time when it happens, we don't look away. Each of them agreed. I gave them access to the live stream link I'd set up unlisted for now, but ready to go public the second the governor's motorcade turned onto our street. Meanwhile, Dale was preparing too. You could see it in the way he walked, straighter spine, sharper steps. He'd swapped out his black tactical vest for a newer one, same HOA enforcement lettering, but now with a laminated patch that read, Neighborhood Access Control. His clipboard grew thicker. His cones multiplied. He even started rehearsing. No joke. I caught him on camera, directing an imaginary checkpoint at the end of the block, waving cars through with hand signals, pacing between his cones like a man who believed himself deployed in a combat zone. No one said a word. The HOA board remained conspicuously silent. No memos, no clarification, no attempt to rein him in. It was as if they were holding their breath, waiting for the storm to either pass or destroy itself. The night before the visit, Dale printed flyers. I saw him delivering them door to door in the fading light. Traffic notice. Temporary HOA checkpoint. Thursday morning. Due to high-profile government activity, Evergreen Hills will implement enhanced safety protocols. Vehicles may be subject to brief inspection. Residents are advised to remain indoors between 7:45 and 8:30 a.m. Thank you for your compliance, HOA Enforcement Division. It was fiction, but it was printed in black ink on letterhead stolen from the HOA's own past newsletters. It looked real, and people believed it. I got 3 texts that night from neighbors asking if they needed to show ID to go for a walk. One man down the street canceled a home health aides appointment for his disabled wife just to avoid complications. The reach of the lie was growing, and still the board said nothing. I checked my cameras again, battery levels, full lenses, clean, everything streaming. By midnight, my server was humming like a heartbeat. At dawn, I woke early, showered, dressed in a clean button-down, and made coffee I didn't drink. I checked every angle of my live feed, then posted the stream link time titled and keyword optimized on 3 community message boards and a local journalist's anonymous tip inbox. Then I waited. At 7:30 a.m., Dale emerged. It was absurd, almost cinematic. He wore both vests, now layered like some self-declared field general. He had his cones, his clipboard, his radio, and now somehow a whistle. Yes, a real silver whistle dangling from a nylon lanyard, like he was about to referee a youth soccer game. He dragged out 2 plastic barriers, cheap sawhorses, with reflective tape, and positioned them diagonally across Juniper Lane. In the center, he set up a folding table and an empty plastic bin labeled Document Inspection. He was building a fake checkpoint, and the governor's convoy was just minutes away. My hands didn't shake. My breathing slowed. Everything I'd seen, everything I'd captured, had led to this. I took my seat on this porch. My camera lights turned green. The live stream viewer count ticked upward: 87, then 213, then 542. By 7:58 a.m., you could hear them sirens in the distance, soft and ceremonial. The motorcade was coming, and Dale Vincent, self-declared HOA cop, was ready to meet it. From the moment Dale positioned himself behind that folding table, I knew he had fully lost touch with reality. Not just blurred the line between volunteer and authority, obliterated it. He had created a full-blown illusion of power. There, in the middle of Juniper Lane, he stood tall and defiant, framed by orange cones and cheap barricades, his clipboard neatly arranged next to a plastic water bottle and a stack of faux vehicle inspection forms printed in all caps. At his feet sat a beat-up cooler marked Secure Documents. The fake checkpoint wasn't just theatrical, it was unnervingly methodical. He even had an entrance-only sign hung from one of the sawhorses with a hand-drawn arrow directing traffic around his makeshift post. It looked like the kind of thing you might see at a kid's lemonade stand, if the lemonade stand also issued fines and demanded paperwork. Dale paced, checked his watch, spoke into his non-functioning radio. Occasionally, he nodded solemnly as if receiving orders from an invisible dispatcher. At 8:01 a.m., the first vehicle appeared at the far end of the street, a police cruiser leading the governor's convoy. It slowed when it approached the barricade. Behind it, 3 black SUVs gleamed in the morning sun. Dark-tinted windows, small antennae, and subtle government plates. The third vehicle bore the state seal on a magnetic placard affixed to the driver's side door. Governor Robert Klein was inside one of those cars. I could see it all clearly through my front window, my screen streaming the event in real time to what had become more than 3,000 live viewers. Journalists, political watchdogs, neighbors from other counties, all tuning in to watch what had until now felt like an isolated neighborhood absurdity. But this was state-level delusion broadcast live. Dale stepped into the middle of the street and raised his arm like he was directing traffic on the tarmac of a military base. The cruiser halted, its engine humming. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened and a state trooper stepped out. He was tall, clean-cut, and very obviously confused. Dale didn't flinch. "This is a restricted access point," he announced, voice loud and rehearsed. "All vehicles must submit identification and reason for entry." The trooper blinked. "Excuse me. This area is under HOA lockdown during scheduled high-level visits. Standard protocol." The trooper glanced around. "You got credentials?" Dale tapped his vest. "Right here." "That's a vest," the trooper said flatly. "Where's your badge ID?" "I am the designated enforcement officer for Evergreen Hills. My authority is acknowledged by the board and community charter." Now I was filming from the doorway. I could hear everything. Another SUV door opened. This time, it was a woman in a navy suit, clearly part of the governor's advance team. She walked over heels, tapping across the pavement with increasing irritation. "Sir," she said to Dale, "you're impeding a scheduled and protected state route. Please move your cones and allow the convoy to proceed." "I cannot authorize passage without documentation," Dale replied, waving his clipboard. "There's been no pre-clearance submitted." "Pre-clearance?" she repeated, stunned. "Are you serious?" He blew the whistle. A sharp, shrill sound that echoed against the two-story homes like a middle school gym class from hell. Then he reached into the cooler and pulled out a laminated sheet titled HOA Roadway Pass. The trooper stepped forward. "All right, that's enough," he said, voice lower, now more dangerous. "You're not with law enforcement. You're obstructing a government official's motorcade. Move!" "No, sir," Dale said, hand rising again. "I have jurisdiction." Then he reached for the handcuffs, clipped to his belt, plastic flimsy, the kind you buy online in packs of 5. It was over in seconds. The trooper advanced, grabbed Dale by the arm, twisted him around, and within a blink, Dale was face down over the folding table, cuffed with real steel. The SUVs rolled past, slowly, barely pausing. The aide walked behind them, tapping her earpiece, muttering something I couldn't hear. The whole arrest lasted less than a minute, but the cameras caught every frame. The live stream chat exploded. Comments poured in faster than I could read. "Is this real? LMAO. HOA cop just got wrecked on live TV. This is why I left the suburbs. This guy is going to end up in jail for impersonating an officer. Y'all better save this recording." By 8:11 a.m., Dale was in the back of a real police cruiser. No radio, no clipboard, just disbelief smeared across his face as the morning sun highlighted every inch of his unraveling fantasy. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a personal victory. This was a communal exhale. Every neighbor who had been too scared to say something, every elderly resident who paid a fine out of fear, every child who had their scooter taken or sidewalk art erased, this was for them. I turned off the front camera, paused the stream, and stepped out into the quiet street where the cones had been kicked aside and the folding table now lay upside down, wheels spinning aimlessly. Dale was gone, but the reckoning had only just begun. Even with Dale now in custody and the immediate threat removed, the moment didn't feel real, at least not yet. Everything had happened so fast. From my position on the porch, I could still see the final SUV in the convoy slowly moving forward, its tires gliding over the pavement that had just minutes before been declared a restricted zone by a man with no authority. The driver offered a brief nod toward our cluster of silent neighbors as they passed like a wordless apology for the circus they'd just witnessed. And then came the moment that made it all undeniable. The unmistakable shape of Governor Robert Klein himself, visible through the half-lowered window of the second SUV. He was looking out, at us, at the sawhorses pushed aside, at the overturned plastic bin, at the yellow cones still lying where they'd been tossed. He seemed unfazed but watchful, as if he'd seen versions of this before, maybe in other neighborhoods, other suburbs, where unchecked authority had created its own bizarre form of power. Then the SUV pulled away, and silence dropped like a curtain. It was broken only by the quiet clinks of neighbors stepping off their porches and into the street. First Mark and Lisa Jefferson, then Carlos and Maria Alvarez, Mrs. Evelyn Cowell. Even the Carmichael family, who rarely left the backyard, stood near the sidewalk in their robes. We were all blinking at each other like people waking up from the same shared dream or nightmare. My phone buzzed, a text from Stan Miller. That was the most insane thing I've ever seen on a live stream. "You just broke local news, maybe even state." Then another from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Cam Whitaker with Channel 9. Can we speak today about your footage?" And another, "Hi, I'm with the governor's communications office. We'd like to clarify a few details with you regarding this morning's incident." I didn't reply, not yet, because in that moment standing there, in the cool morning light, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even triumphant. I was something simpler, something quieter. Relieved. Dale Vincent had made our peaceful neighborhood into a stage. And like all bad actors who push their part too far, he'd been caught during his curtain call. But the real play, the one that mattered, was still going. I turned to see Devin Carter, a teenage neighbor holding up his phone, still filming. He gave me a thumbs up. "Dude, you called it. This thing's blowing up." "How many views?" I asked. He looked down at his screen. "Over 50,000 on TikTok. Twitter's going crazy." "Great." But I wasn't interested in going viral. I was interested in making sure this didn't get swept under the rug. Because the truth was, even after the arrest, even after the handcuffs, the SUV, the cameras, there were still bigger questions. Like, how did Dale get this far? Who in the HOA had encouraged him, or worse, enabled him? Why had no one stepped in sooner even when the signs were impossible to miss? And more importantly, how many others like him were out there in other neighborhoods hiding behind laminated badges and phony titles? That afternoon, I sifted through my saved files again. I added a few new entries clips from the arrest, wide-angle footage of the barricade setup, audio from his whistle blasts, and time-stamped frames of the governor's vehicle approaching. I backed it all up twice. Then I sat down and drafted an email to a small group, HOA board members, city officials, and a few trusted reporters. Subject line: documented pattern of abuse. Evergreen Hills incident archive attached. The body of the email was brief. Please find attached a curated folder of video evidence, audio, and documents illustrating the unauthorized and illegal actions of Dale Vincent, self-declared HOA enforcement officer in Evergreen Hills. These materials also demonstrate a timeline of complicity, or at best, negligence, on the part of the HOA board. The footage includes the now widely broadcast incident during the governor's motorcade passage. For the safety and peace of this community, a full investigation is warranted. I hesitated for a moment. Then I hit send. The message flew across the digital ether, carrying with it the weight of months of silent tension, fear, and fabricated authority. Outside, two children chased each other with sidewalk chalk and foam swords. Mrs. Evelyn Cowell waved as she placed a pot of daisies on her porch. A delivery truck rolled quietly down the lane, no cones, no clipboard, waiting. The street was just a street again. Later that evening, I received an alert. The governor's press team had issued a public statement. This morning's unfortunate obstruction of Governor Klein's scheduled route in Evergreen Hills has raised important concerns about unregulated enforcement activities within private residential communities. The matter has been referred to state authorities for formal review. It was the first time I'd ever seen the words HOA and state authorities in the same sentence. It felt like progress. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. The camera footage was just the beginning. The real work, accountability, change, rebuilding trust, that would come next. But for the first time in a long time, Evergreen Hills didn't feel like a place run by fear or silence. It felt like a place where people had seen the truth, together. And maybe, just maybe, they were ready to speak up. By the time the sun had fully risen over Evergreen Hills that Thursday morning, the footage had already spread far beyond our cul-de-sac. The arrest might have taken only 60 seconds, but in internet time, it was a lifetime. The clip, cropped, subtitled, and now circulating with headlines like "Fake HOA Cop Tries to Block Governor's Convoy," had gone from viral curiosity to statewide controversy in less than 3 hours. By noon, it was on every major local affiliate. Channel 4, 9, and 12 ran back-to-back segments featuring the video from my porch. CNN and MSNBC picked it up on their digital platforms by mid-afternoon. Even a segment on Good Morning America previewed it for the next day's show under a chyron that read "Power-tripping HOA cop arrested during governor's visit." But while the world laughed or gasped, we in Evergreen Hills were still reeling. The jokes online were fast and brutal, photoshopped memes of Dale in a plastic sheriff's outfit, someone labeling his barricade checkpoint cringe. But inside our community, it felt like a wall had cracked, and behind it spilled a flood of questions and shame. Because this wasn't just about Dale anymore. This was about the people who had watched him, who'd let him get this far, and who now pretended they hadn't. That same afternoon, the HOA board finally released an official statement emailed to all homeowners and posted somewhat cowardly on the community bulletin board near the pool. The Evergreen Hills HOA board is aware of the unfortunate events that occurred during today's state visit. We wish to clarify that Mr. Dale Vincent was never a formally contracted representative of the HOA. His actions were neither sanctioned nor encouraged by this board. We are cooperating fully with local authorities and have suspended all volunteer-led safety initiatives until further notice. Suspended, not dissolved, not condemned. It was damage control, plain and thin as paper. But I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me, though, was what came next. People started talking. Out loud. In public. With names. The same neighbors who once peeked from behind blinds now gathered in small groups on sidewalks, their voices tight but firm. Stories surfaced about Dale warning a woman not to wear offensive colors, while gardening about a teenager whose skateboard had been confiscated by Dale and never returned, about fake citations demanding payments made to a P.O. box that now finally had been confirmed as Dale's. I watched it unfold like I used to watch raw feeds in the editing room. Fast, disjointed, messy, but honest. And then came the homeowners meeting. It was originally scheduled for the following month, but after public pressure sparked in large part by the videos and media attention, the board announced an emergency session. Held at the community clubhouse, the same place where Dale had once hosted his compliance briefings, the meeting was meant to be a formality. But Evergreen Hills wasn't in the mood for ceremony anymore. I arrived 10 minutes early, camera in hand. The room was packed. Every folding chair filled, people standing along the walls, fans whirring ineffectively in the corners. The HOA board sat at a long table in front, trying to look composed. Martha Sanderson wore a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and the tight-lipped expression of someone used to controlling a room. But not tonight. The moment the floor opened for homeowner comments, the floodgates broke. Mrs. Evelyn Cowell was first. She read a short, trembling statement about how Dale had threatened to file a report when she refused to remove a small American flag from her garden. Her voice cracked halfway through, but no one interrupted. Next was Mr. Wei Chang, holding a folder of donation receipts he'd written to Dale's fake enforcement fund. Then Carlos Alvarez, who recounted how Dale had demanded their 7-year-old remove sidewalk chalk drawings of sunflowers because they violated visual uniformity. Each story landed like a stone in the room. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I just played the video projected from my laptop onto the wall behind the board. The full clip, Dale blocking the governor's convoy, blowing his whistle, being arrested in full view of the neighborhood and state troopers. No editing, no commentary, just the facts. When it ended, the room was silent. Martha Sanderson cleared her throat. "We appreciate the concerns raised here tonight." No, someone said from the back. "We want answers." Someone else stood. "Why did you let him do this? Why didn't anyone stop him when he started writing fake tickets?" A third voice. "How many complaints did you ignore?" The board members exchanged looks. Martha looked down at her notes, flustered. I think it's clear we made some mistakes in judgment," she said. "Mistakes. You gave a man a platform, encouraged his behavior, and looked the other way when he pretended to be law enforcement. And now a grandmother was in tears. A family was humiliated. A teenager felt unsafe in his own neighborhood, and you call that a mistake." But I didn't say any of that. I didn't have to. The room said it for me. A vote of no confidence was called. Not formally, but loudly. And echoed by so many voices, it couldn't be ignored. There were calls for resignations, demands for bylaw amendments, requests for a third-party audit of every fine, warning, and donation collected under Dale's watch. They weren't just angry, they were awake. That night, as I walked home under a clear sky, I passed 3 homes with porch lights turned on for the first time in weeks. Children were drawing again on the sidewalks with chalk sunflowers, stars, and silly cartoon faces. And Dale's cones, gone. The fake checkpoint, dismantled. But the record, the truth, still very much alive. And finally, the community that once let a man patrol its silence was learning to raise its voice. It was strange how quickly the world moved after the moment was captured. 1 second, Dale Vincent was standing with 1 foot on a sawhorse, blowing his whistle like a battlefield commander. The next, he was on the ground, handcuffed by real officers, his face twisted somewhere between confusion and indignation. And I caught it all, in high definition, on 3 angles. The main camera, a porch-mounted wide shot, captured the entirety of the checkpoint confrontation from a head-on view. You could see the state trooper step out, you could hear Dale's fake authority trembling in his voice, and you could see the moment it dawned on him that this wasn't going to end in his favor. But it was the second camera, the body-level lens mounted to my side fence, that got the money shot Dale mid-whistle, reaching for his plastic handcuffs, just as the officer spun him around and clamped real steel to his wrists. The audio was perfect. The reaction of the convoy, the silence of the neighborhood, the grunts of Dale insisting he had jurisdiction. It was damning, crystal clear, and unsingable. I edited nothing, didn't need to. By the end of the day, the livestream replay had passed 200,000 views. My email inbox was flooded with media requests, legal inquiries, and neighbors writing to say they were sorry they hadn't spoken up sooner. People I barely knew knocked on my door offering cupcakes, thank you handshakes, but I wasn't celebrating, because Dale wasn't just some clown in a vest. He was a symptom of something deeper. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed, the glow of the security feeds still rolling on my tablet, thinking about every step that led to this. The early warnings, the fake tickets, the silence from the board, the willingness, no eagerness of people to obey a man just because he acted like he was in charge. The next morning, Channel 9 ran a full segment. The anchor, a clean-cut man named Brett Larson, whom I once shared a control booth with in Harrisburg, delivered it like a thriller script. Last night, what started as a neighborhood oddity in Evergreen Hills exploded into statewide headlines when a self-appointed HOA enforcement officer was arrested after attempting to block the governor's convoy with a fake checkpoint. They played the clip, unedited. By noon, the governor's office had confirmed Dale Vincent would be facing charges for impersonating an officer obstruction of a government official and unlawful detainment. The arrest affidavit was already circulating. My footage had been submitted as part of the state's evidence file. But it wasn't the legal fallout that struck me most, it was the human one. I stepped out that afternoon to find a small crowd gathered at the neighborhood bulletin board. They weren't looking at HOA flyers or lawn maintenance tips. They were looking at a printed screenshot of Dale being arrested taped in the middle of the board with bold letters scribbled across the top. Never again. I didn't put it there. Someone else had. And that was the moment I realized the community was finally seeing the truth. Not just Dale's abuse, but their own silence, their own compliance, their own part in letting it grow. I walked further down the block. Mrs. Evelyn Cowell had put her flag back in the flower bed. The Jeffersons had replaced their welcome mat, the one Dale once called non-standard. A chalk drawing of a dragon sprawled across the sidewalk in front of the Alvarez house, complete with the words, "Free to draw" underneath it. And near the end of the street, a child had built a small cardboard booth labeled Real Checkpoint with a sign that said, "Only good vibes allowed." It was sweet and a little heartbreaking. That evening, I received a call from Officer Greg Daniels, the same trooper who had arrested Dale. He wanted to let me know that the video evidence was being processed officially and thanked me for my cooperation. Then just before hanging up, he added, "You know, I've seen a lot of wild stuff on duty, but that guy, he really believed he was in charge." I didn't respond at first. Then I said yeah, and everyone else let him believe it. "Not anymore," he replied and ended the call. It stuck with me. Not anymore. I knew this wasn't the end of HOA power games. Not by a long shot. But it was a turning point for our neighborhood, for the system that allowed it, and for people like me, who had spent years thinking someone else would step in. That night, I walked the length of Juniper Lane with a cup of decaf and the warm spring breeze brushing my skin. I stopped near the place Dale had built his barricade. The asphalt was bare now, quiet. Kids were riding bikes down the middle of the street. The sun bounced off the windows of homes that finally felt like homes again, not monitored zones. Devin Carter rolled by on his scooter and shouted, "Hey, Mr. Tom, you gonna live stream the next town hall?" I laughed. "Only if someone shows up in a vest again." He laughed too and disappeared down the block. It was over, but it had also just begun this slow, steady rebuild of trust, this redefinition of what a community could be when fear no longer held the mic. In the days that followed, Evergreen Hills felt like a place I had only imagined when I first moved here. Not perfect, but finally human again. The strange tension that had sat heavy in the air for months, that low-grade hum of anxiety every time Dale's shadow fell across someone's driveway, was gone. People no longer avoided eye contact. Kids were back on the sidewalks, drawing hopscotch grids and lopsided smiley faces. Porch lights came on at dusk, not because residents were worried about surveillance, but because someone might stop by to say hello. I didn't think a neighborhood could collectively exhale, but we did. There were reminders, of course, faint echoes of what had happened. The empty frame on the bulletin board where the HOA used to post warnings was still there, though someone had now pinned a watercolor of a bluebird next to a hand-lettered sign that read, "We watch out for each other, not over each other." The interim board held an open forum under the pergola at the park. No clipboards, no rules about grass length. Just people sitting in folding chairs, drinking lemonade, and talking about what they wanted Evergreen Hills to become now that we'd pulled ourselves out of the shadow of a fraud. I was asked to speak. I declined at first, but when Mrs. Evelyn Cowell gently put her hand on my arm and said, "You helped give us back our voices. Let us hear yours," I stood up. I didn't prepare remarks. I didn't need to. I told them about how I moved here for peace after retiring, how I thought this place would give me stillness and privacy, and how ironically, it wasn't until someone tried to steal that peace with a fake vest and a clipboard that I realized what I truly valued was connection. Not just a quiet street, but a shared one. People listened, not because I was a hero or a whistleblower or a YouTube citizen journalist, but because I was a neighbor, one of them. A man who had simply stopped waiting for someone else to speak first. And then, like everything else that truly matters, healing came not from a speech, but from what happened afterward. One by one, neighbors came to me not to praise, but to share. Their stories, their fears, their regrets, their plans. Sarah Nguyen from the corner lot confessed that she once paid Dale $100 because he threatened to report her fence. She cried when she said it. I didn't say much, just nodded. She needed to be heard, not fixed. Later that week, I dismantled the extra security rigs I had installed, the redundant ones tucked behind flower beds, and mounted to gutters. Not because I no longer believed in being prepared, but because I no longer felt the need to live like I was waiting for the next storm. I left the original cameras in place, the doorbell, the driveway cam. I'm not naive, but I turned off the motion alerts because I finally felt safe enough to be surprised again. A few days after the board's full restructuring, a quiet envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a simple handwritten note. We failed you. You didn't fail us. Thank you for seeing what we couldn't. There was no signature, but I knew it was from Martha. I folded the note, placed it in the back of the same folder where I had once stored screenshots, time-stamped footage, and HOA newsletters. I didn't shred it. I didn't post it. I just kept it. Proof that even those who once ignored the truth could find their way back to it. Dale Vincent, as far as I knew, remained in custody pending trial. His name trended for 2 days straight before being swallowed by newer, louder stories. Internet fame burns fast. But here, in the quiet cul-de-sac where it all happened, the legacy wasn't viral, it was lived. Peace didn't return all at once. It arrived in small pieces. A chalk mural signed by every child on the block. A Friday night potluck with more laughter than I'd heard in a year. A new sign near the community park that read "Neighborhood Watch by Us for Us." And perhaps most telling of all, a single laminated placard tucked into the garden next to the pool house, mounted on a small wooden stake, no bigger than a page. It read, "We don't need fake badges, we have each other." So yes, I kept some cameras. Not out of fear, but out of habit. But the real safety didn't come from lenses or Wi-Fi connections. It came from the fact that Evergreen Hills had finally opened its eyes, not to watch, but to see. And once we saw what power looked like in the wrong hands, we stopped giving it away so easily. I still sit on the porch most mornings, coffee in hand, listening to birdsong and the occasional bark of a dog down the street. Sometimes I rewatch the footage not for revenge, not for entertainment, but as a reminder. That truth matters, that silence is a choice, and that even in the most ordinary places, the line between peace and control is thinner than we think. But when people stand up together, that line becomes visible, and that's how we guard it. Not with whistles, with courage.